Hello, World Wide Web. Welcome to the Hangin' With Web Show. I'm GW Pomichter. Thank you so much for logging on and tuning in, clicking links. However you got here, you will regret it. I mean, we're going to have a lot of fun. We are hanging out right now with our great friends at Authors for Authors at their annual writers conference, and we've got a whole long list of fantastic writers and creators to talk to today. We are hanging out right now with author Eleanor Tremayne, the author of High Tea with Ophelia. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming over and hanging out with us this morning. Well, let's talk a little bit about High Tea with Ophelia. So tell us a little bit, give us kind of the book blurb here.
Okay, the book blurb basically is, it takes place in St. Augustine, Florida. That's where I live.
Awesome.
And it's about 5 characters who step out of the pages of their books into a bookstore where the main character owns a bookstore, and she needs some help with her life because her husband had died. And so the 5 characters are her favorite characters, and the first one is Holly Golightly from Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Not bad. If you're going to have company, that's pretty good, yeah.
And then the second one is Scarlett O'Hara.
Wow.
And then the third one is Daisy Buchanan from Great Gatsby.
Yes.
And then the fourth one is a character from one of my other books, Gabriella Gerard.
Because why not? Yes.
Right, why not?
Absolutely.
Because the author or the book store woman read my book, and so she
absolutely
likes that
yes.
character. And let's see, the 5th character. I'm trying to figure out who was the 5th character. Let's see, do I have 4?
That was Holly Golightly. Yep, that was 4. Yep.
Let me see. I can't remember what the 4th character is. I should know that. Let's see. It was Holly Golightly. It was Holly Golightly, and it was Daisy Buchanan, and it was
Scarlett O'Hara,
and it was Gabriella Gerard, and Mystery Woman.
That's right. You have to read the book to find out.
You'll have to find out.
You'll have to find out. You have to read the book to find out.
I think there is actually one that just pops up.
That's a nice. You know what? If you're going to have a tea party, that's a crew to have it with. Oh, and my.
I started, the idea came to me because I was in the Leitner Museum, and this one woman, this young girl actually, came in and she was dressed in a Victorian outfit. And I asked her, was she going to be participating in the Leitner? And she says, oh, no, this is what I dressed in every day.
I love it.
So I thought, this might be an interesting story. And so then, since I was a English literature teacher for 25 years, I just kind of put the rest of them together.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
that is awesome.
So
obviously, we know what heroines are on your mind.
Yes.
Right? If you had to pick one favorite heroine, who's your favorite? Do you have a favorite in that crowd?
Probably Holly Golightly.
She's so much fun, isn't she?
Yes, she is. And she's pretty complex.
Yes.
And Truman Capote was one of my favorite writers. When I was doing my master's, got my master's degree, he was my thesis, part of my thesis.
Oh, wow.
So, and at the time, he wasn't really popular. I mean, he really only wrote one story, which was In Cold Blood, and all the others are short stories. So I kind of tend to go with Holly Golightly because I thought she was really interesting and complex. And
you know what's great about that character is that she has a very two-dimensional surface, and everything is in the nuance.
Right.
And I mean, and it's very much the way we are, and that's one of the things that Capote really did well.
Yes.
Was he created a very hyper-realistic environment.
Right. And you could relate to her.
Exactly. It was very
ways.
relatable
Yes.
because on the surface, everything was just that. It was
Right.
very go light. It was very, everything was just okay. And then as you peeled away those layers, you start to see that there's a very complex woman underneath these.
Oh, the other character was Ophelia.
Oh.
Of course.
Huh.
Ophelia is the first
See?
one.
How's that?
From Hamlet. When you're talking about complex.
Well, you got another complex,
right,
and Ophelia, again, another complex character that doesn't have a lot of interactions, doesn't have a lot of places for you to find the complexities of that
Right.
character. And I think probably since its inception, since Hamlet's first hit the stage, The actress is left with a lot of work to do to convey in a handful of lines and a handful of interactions a complexity of character.
And there's been a lot of research now that I did on Ophelia, and they have done things like what would have happened if Ophelia really did not kill herself. And they've got a whole new play about that.
Wow.
And
yes, I did. I think I read something about that.
And I included
Yes.
some of that in there. So,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so there's a lot of new things about Ophelia that even, it's not limited just to Hamlet's Ophelia. And so I thought I had a good time playing around with that a little bit. And
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So this centers around a bookstore owner, and obviously her love affair with her fictional characters. Right. Okay. And in the story, what's the catalyst for her to kind of dive into this imaginary world?
Well, she was a professor at University of New Orleans, and she met her husband there. The main character's name is Sabriel, and she met her husband there, and she came from an orphanage, so she really didn't have a very close relationship with people.
Okay.
So he was her first real love, and he was much older than her, and he ends up dying of cancer. And so before that, they had talked about when he retired to go to St. Augustine and open a bookstore. That's what she wanted, a little bookstore with a coffee shop and a little tea place and all that. And so when his last words to her is, "Go back to St. Augustine and live our dream." And so she goes there, but she still has a hard time with his loss, and so she kind of turns to these characters that she has
who have
read
experienced, and that's it.
They've
all experienced
Right.
loss. They've all
Exactly.
experienced the pains of life.
Right.
And each one dealt in different ways, so they can each
They can
one has
teach
something
her.
to teach her something
So
a little
the
bit
teacher
more.
is now being taught by the characters.
That's fantastic. Which is, by the way, what literary characters do, guys.
Exactly.
They teach us things about ourselves that we didn't even know.
Right.
So now this is not your first book?
This is my fifth book.
Your fifth book. And how long have you been writing professionally?
Since 2015.
Since 2015. Wow. And before that, you
I was
were
an English teacher,
an English
high school
teacher.
teacher in California.
Outstanding.
And I taught college for a few years there too.
That's fantastic.
And so then we moved to Ohio. We were raising our grandson, and then when he graduated, he's going to Kent State right now. As soon as he graduated, I said, "No more Ohio. It's way too cold." So I picked up my books, and we ended up in St. Augustine, which is
Fantastic. That's right, the nation's oldest city, guys.
Yeah.
So the transition from academic to author.
It was very difficult for me because I've
All
always,
except for the finances, guys, because
yeah, anything's better, with financial.
Yeah, there you go.
teaching.
Yeah.
But
Got that first book sale, and she was like, "Yes, I've already doubled last year."
Teaching literature, you get one side of it, and you're so involved with what the writers have achieved that you don't think you could ever do like as well as they did.
Yeah, no, I think every writer sits at the typewriter or the keyboard for the first time for that first story.
Right.
And you're barraged with these images in your mind from Hemingway to Whitman you're barraged with every great storyteller in history, and the self-doubt it can be crippling at the keyboard.
It was.
How did you get over that? Where did you find your strength?
Well, as soon as I retired, I really wanted my first novel to be about my grandmother who left St. Petersburg, Russia in 1917, and she exiled there, and she met the last prince of Khiva, and they got married.
Wow.
And she went to Mexico, and then she came to the United States. She had a really amazing story, and she practically raised me. So that's what I really wanted to do, is to attribute to her. But I didn't think it was such a big project.
It's a massive story.
Yes.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, I'll start off with something more personal. So I started writing Destiny Revisited, which is a story about people who want to make changes in their lives based on choices that they had made earlier in their lives. And so I put it in the 1960s in Savannah, Georgia. This young couple in high school, and he goes off to Vietnam and loses his leg, and all of her whole world falls apart. And so she thinks.
By the way, still a pretty heady story,
yes,
guys.
yeah. And so anyway.
She didn't really lessen the load all that much.
And so it goes through, it goes from the 60s to the present and what she's gone through. And he sends her, they haven't seen each other for 20 years, and he sends her a box. Actually, his wife gives her the box because he has died, and she brings his box, and it's called the death box to her. And in the death box are all these letters and all these things that he wanted to do with her. Had all these things happen. Mm-hmm. So he sends her to Europe and all. So it just goes on to a bigger story. And so then she decides, did I really make the right choice when I left, or didn't I? Mm-hmm. And so then I finished that book, and it was pretty well received. And everybody, it's a cliffhanger at the end. And they said, "Oh, you can't."
Spoiler alert!
You're gonna leave me with this.
Yeah.
So I added the second one, which is Destiny Revealed, and then I finally did the 7 Days in Lebanon, which is a play on the word Lebanon, because I was living in Ohio, and there's a Lebanon, Ohio.
Yes.
So one of the main character Anastasia, it's her grandmother. That it's a historical fiction, and so everything about my grandmother is real, but I added in as Anastasia as my character, and she lives in Lebanon. And so there's a little twist there.
Okay.
So I wrote that one, and then I wrote after that The Mermaid's Grandson.
The Mermaid's Grandson.
Which is a fantasy, but it's no mermaids that you probably would have ever met. It's a family, it's a dynasty of mermaids who live on Earth. And it takes them back from the 15th, 16th century to present, and what they've gone through and what they're willing to give up for their grandson, who happens to be half merman and half human.
Oh, wow.
And he doesn't know it. And so
that's gonna.
And then I ended up with High Tea with Ophelia after that, and I just finished my 6th novel, which is The Agape Journey.
Wow.
And it's about a carpet that's 2,000 years old that has spiritual powers.
Fantastic.
There's treasure hunters that are looking for it.
What's your favorite part? This, guys, for those of you that don't know, being an author there's so much. There's so many components and elements to being an author, whether it's creating your characters and sort of building your world in the background and taking your notes, or setting pen to paper and actually sitting and banging out a chapter here and a chapter there. There are so many elements to being an author, and then of course once published, there's push and market and meet your readers. Mm-hmm. What is your favorite part of being a professional author?
I love meeting with people who want to read my book. So I do book clubs, I do speaking events,
Awesome.
I do workshops, creative workshops. I love the fact that somebody's reading and I can talk to them about what I've written, and to see what their reactions are. And by the way, one of the things that I've done to help me transition from that fear of writing all the wonderful writers that I taught is that all my books have some literature in it.
Awesome.
And they all begin with a quote at the beginning of each chapter. And that chapter foreshadows what's going to happen.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And they're from everywhere. And then I also kind of intermingle a lot of literary references, and I use allusions, and I use a lot of things so that it's layered. So hopefully people can read it at different levels, but I feel I'm still teaching.
I think that's amazing because, we all do this. Some of us do it instinctively, and some of us do it intentionally. Mm-hmm. Everything we write comes from somewhere.
Right.
And so if you're doing social commentary, there's almost no doubt that a writer who's doing a social commentary play hasn't incorporated some Dickens, or we all do it. We're influenced by those things that we read and we see on television, and now our visual storytelling from the internet to television and movies has become so epic. They're actually doing literature, and doing it well. I mean, I think back to as being a kid, seeing the first adaptations of something like David Copperfield and thinking there's so much they couldn't get in there, and there's so much they couldn't do. But now the time format is almost unlimited. So Peter Jackson can take 9 hours to tell us, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or another 9 to tell us The Hobbit, which, by the way, is a book about this thick. I have no idea. To be able to do it intentionally, though, to take that expertise that you had and to say, you know what, I'd like this chapter or this story to represent a modern telling of something
Because
different.
I wanted to relate to people's lives, and literature, I believe, is universal. Almost everything, good literature, goes beyond time limits, and so I want that to continue. And I write everywhere. You talk about pen and paper. I put everything on my phone. I bring my phone with me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I have Word on it, and I'm writing all the time. And I'm already thinking my next 2 or 3 books are in my head. So I'm always thinking about what I'm going to do next. And so my next book after all of this is probably going to be, it's called the St. Augustine Sisterhood. And it's going to be about a group of women who have expanded through time, the important women in St. Augustine.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm always thinking about what I'm going to do next. And my husband says, did your mind ever stop moving? And I go, no, I don't know why, but it's all there. When it does, then I'll be done. But I've never had writer's block.
Great.
I just
what
continue
would
to
be
think.
what's the pinnacle? What is the thing? What would be the moment when you just kind of look at all of your work and you say, wow, this is me. This is, what's the great goal?
I would love to go back and actually teach a class of my books.
Hey guys,
indie writers.
universities, colleges out there.
I think I've got now 5 books, almost 6. So I have enough that I could probably do. It would be interesting to see what my students would say, and I have some students that have come back, obviously because of Facebook, and they've read it. And they go, "Wow, we never knew all of this stuff about you." But I mean, you really open yourself up that way.
You do, because so much of you gets poured into your stories that you
Exactly.
sometimes you didn't even know it was there.
Right.
Speaking of which, you do a lot of, again, more contemporary retellings
Yes.
of literary themes. In doing so, have you experienced any kind of sort of reader backlash on because so many of our literary stories are embedded in us, and they're also embedded in the time they came from.
Right.
Women didn't have much of a say in Dickens's world because they just didn't at the time. He didn't know that. Ethnic and racial differences were much more stark in different periods of time. So when you're looking at those themes, do you work extra hard to try to contemporize them?
I included, it's interesting you say that because Scarlett O'Hara is in the book.
See, and that's another great example. So
Yes.
Scarlett's worldview so much different than a modern, worldview. So how do you incorporate that? And do you get feedback from readers who say, "Gee, I wish you hadn't done this," or "Gee, I wish you could have done this a little better"?
Well, what I did with Scarlett is that she walks out of her book as Scarlett, and she doesn't realize that anything she's ever done is wrong.
Of course, yeah. This
That's
is just her
just the way
life.
her life is. And there's a restaurant in St. Augustine called Scarlett O'Hara. And she ends up going there, and there's all these pictures on the wall of her and everything, and she's all excited about it. And there happens to be a black couple that's sitting there. And she goes up there and starts talking to them about why are they there and what's going on, because she doesn't know. And so, of course, the owner comes over to her and says, "Oh, you're going to have to leave," So what happens is she does leave, and she goes and talks to Ophelia and a couple of the other characters, Holly, and she says, "I don't know what I did wrong." So they tell her what she's done wrong.
Okay.
And they try to explain to her what you did wrong has nothing to do with where your time period was, but you're now living in the 21st century.
And welcome to the things
reality.
you can't say.
Exactly. So I try to do that a little bit.
With my first book, I wrote a 1940s story. And one of the things that I found out was that, a reader would read it and they would say, "Wow, your character didn't treat a woman very well, or didn't do this." And I was trying to think, I don't know how else to write it, though. That was faithful to their period.
Right.
But I love what you did. She gets her own journey. She gets to learn something.
Right.
Which is really what characters are. That's how they compel us, is because
Exactly.
they learn.
Right. And
That's
because it's coming from
fantastic.
her, it makes it a little easier for the audience, I think, the reader, to understand, rather than lecturing to them about, her being
Yeah, no,
wrong.
and I mean, if you guys could talk to your favorite literary characters in their time period, what lesson would you want them to learn from you?
Right.
Because you're going to learn one from them.
That's right.
So what would you want to teach them? That's amazing. That's fantastic. Guys, we have got to wrap it up. We've been hanging out with Eleanor Tremayne, the author of High Tea with Ophelia and other titles. So please check those out. Go on over to Amazon, do a search, Eleanor Tremayne, and see what kind of books are there. You guys are going to love it. And I love that you took your literature background and your passion for literature and turned it into becoming a contributor to that
That's
literature.
what I'm hoping is, let it live on.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much,
Thank
Eleanor.
you.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Nice to meet
Guys,
you.
as we get ready to wrap things up, we want to remind you to check out all of the links in the description down below so that you can check out Eleanor's work. You can also check out our great partners and friends. We're at Authors for Authors this weekend. Remember, everybody, stay tuned in, stay logged on, and see who we're hanging with next.